Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, Perfect Building Maintenance, M&T Bank, Customers Bank, Marks Paneth LLP, Capital One Bank, Collins Building Services, Meridian Capital Group. Additional support has been provided by grants from AKA Hotel Residences Corman Communities, Ariel Property Advisors, Amerant Bank, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, Chase Commercial Mortgage Lending, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Citizens Bank, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties LLC, Handler Real Estate Organization, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Casamatides Red Apple Group, Keysight Capital Partners, Matone Group, New Banks, Newmark Knight Frank, Ocean First Bank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Services, Stonehenge NYC, SVN CPEX Real Estate Services, Tierra CRG, the Meringer Family Foundation, and these friends. Can you imagine $9 billion invested in PropTech in 2019? Who knows what the number is going to be for 2020, but industry insiders believe it's going to be way in excess of the $9 billion. People are involved with PropTech, a combination of property and technology for real estate. So today I've assembled this group of leaders from all over the world, including Sydney, Australia, to participate on this panel discussion on PropTech for Real Estate Update 2020. My guests include Brad Klatt, co-founder of Logical Buildings, Jeffrey Friedman, CEO of Building Intelligence, Inc., Joel Leslie from Sydney, Australia, founder, CTO of Property TV and Stealth Ventures, and last but not least, the man with the money, Warren Haber Jr., who is the managing director at Exo Ventures Associates. So, Joel, since you're the furthest away from us at 1 o'clock in the morning, tell me what you're doing in the PropTech space.
We've founded Property TV, and the goal of Property TV is to be like a HGTV merged with Netflix, but delivered more like a CNBC style. We saw that there was a big gap in the industry around discussion globally in property, from commercial through to residential. And so we created a platform that broadcasts and makes available via on-demand property-related TV. We're concentrating on the industry at the moment. So what is happening in PropTech is one of the things we're talking about. What's happening within the sales environment from an urban planning perspective from commercial. So we're really hoping to talk about that whole discussion globally.
Now, since you're based in Sydney, how much of your viewers are based in the US and other parts of the world?
Last year was our biggest year within US rankings, and we got over 50% of our audience is US based, about 10% from Europe, and then the remainder is, the Asia Pacific. So, Singapore through to Australia down to New Zealand.
Brad, let's talk a little bit about you. Brad is a frustrated, very successful real estate developer, former investment banker, who's also now in the energy business and the PropTech. And I noticed that you were just received an award with UDR on your system. Tell me about your company and what you're doing.
We built Roseland Property Company over 20 years, a $4 billion multifamily development company headquartered mostly in the Northeast, large buildings. And from 2006 to 2012, we sold a lot of our land and our operating business to 4 public companies. But as we were serving post-merger purgatory for 2 or 3 years in our acquiring company, we were continuing our white papering work to improve what we were doing in the ordinary course of our business. And one of them was focused on energy management. First largest expense in apartment houses, large apartment houses, is salaries. Second is taxes. In the Northeast, that's all contractual by virtue of statutory oversight. And the third is energy. And in a large office building with large apartment building with $6 million of expenses, that might be $800,000-$900,000 on the common area side of the building, and another $800,000-$900,000 in the tenant area of the building. So we developed a system that would think about how to take advantage of those costs being reduced with technology, companies all software, focused on becoming married, if you will, to the infrastructure of the utilities who in the Northeast and now around the country were desperately in need of reduction in load and shedding load at the right times by many, most, or all of their customers in order to sustain the deliveries they were required to do at the same time when they can't make new power plants. And that was really the genesis of the program, focusing on our own investments. The group spun out of our company into Logical Buildings, and now we are the leading multifamily deliverer of software that effectively manages energy and sustainability achievements for more than 1,000 buildings in the US in partnership with many utilities, and the only company that's live on the Con Ed new AMI infrastructure cloud-based platform. So that's what we do. It's a tremendously interesting business because we're out in the field with a lot of other wonderful companies partnering with us and moving forward into a merger of technologies, AMI infrastructure, carbon reduction regulations, that is becoming one of the strongest, I would say, desired to be in areas by the players who understand the value of the data and creating less load for our grids.
Jeffrey, you're the other building, okay? And you're in the intelligence building, but you were created because of a variety of needs, 9/11, other situations. Why don't you tell me and my audience a little bit about
Building Intelligence primarily is a SaaS-based company, which is software as a service for solutions for the front of the house and the back of the house. And Michael, the thesis behind PropTech and why the $9 billion is there's a new element of why people buy real estate. That's the thesis. Location, 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 and technology. That ultimately what's really happening is there's technology being introduced to the front of the house, what looks good, what's an amenity, what's making it secure. And there's technology like Logical Buildings, which is the back of the house, of what technology does this building offer me as a corporate commercial real estate leasing, a lease or a resident. What do I get when I get this property? So technology like Building Intelligence, which basically services visitor management, the experience of the visitor being both safe, and these days safe is important, and what kind of rich amenity am I delivering to my incoming visitors and my employees. And then on the back of the house, we do loading dock and vendor management, which is obviously important in terms of managing the supply chain of many businesses. So,
you know, before I ask Warren, because he's an investor in your company and other companies, tell me about the building, the management for the trucks and the deliveries.
So it's really a simple idea, which stemmed from just being in New York, is that the concept of any vehicle or any vendor having access to a building simply because they put on a uniform, because they're from a phone company, doesn't really make any sense in terms of security. So when you look at a van coming into a building, we create a process to create a trusted environment for the van, the driver, and the vendor that's supporting it, inclusive of whether or not that vendor has a certificate of insurance and is insured. So if you run a building, you really don't want vendors in your building that are not insured. You certainly don't want them if they're dangerous personnel. So theory is based on OSHA and other regulations, you're supposed to create a protected environment for your people and your building and your asset, that you would have a method for managing the vendors that come into the back of the house. And building intelligence provides that a very complete solution for security, logistics, and operations.
So now we talk to the man who's been involved with venture capital for at least the past 26, 27 years. Tell me, Warren, why do you invest in building intelligence, and where do you see the opportunities?
The investment thesis for building intelligence is that it provides an integrated all-in-one system to manage multiple workflows. It's a proven proprietary technology. It's a cloud-based system, as Jeff alluded to, in that basically folks don't require any third-party software resident on their infrastructure. They have a Security Act designation, so Homeland Security has designated their software. They have a huge connector library that they've developed over many years. It's a third-party software that connects to a lot of other repositories of information and data. And as Jeff kind of touched upon, the economics of the loading docks has gotten very complicated, and building intelligence provides a way in which buildings can better manage those economics. So that's kind of the investment thesis for BI. But more broadly speaking, as you mentioned, the prop tech sector has been exploding. That's the good news. Over the past number of years, we've seen, an extraordinary amount of capital, especially early stage capital. Since 2013, I think we've seen over $40 billion invested in prop tech. So that's the good news. The bad news is prop tech as an industry is relatively new, and it's focused for whatever reasons on infrastructure that has been unmalleable for a while. And that's because the value chain within real estate has a lot of large incumbents who don't easily make decisions to change. And what venture capitalists look for is changes in behavior. And it's not easy to change a lot of this behavior. One of the companies we've been involved with, as you touched upon, Michael, for a long time, is CoStar, which is one of the largest repositories of commercial data in the world. But it's taken literally decades to create this incumbent position whereby they can provide kind of the de facto source for information. Now, information, fortunately, given what's going on in the pandemic, is under turmoil, and it's being required in a much more real-time, much more urgent manner because of the way in which the pandemic has hit. Many of us remember March 9th, when in essence, our country shut down almost immediately. What's being garnered from a lot of the information we're hearing in surveys is that the reopening of commercial real estate is going to happen exactly the opposite, meaning it's going to happen in a phased approach. And many of the major commercial real estate owners that we're speaking with are saying, we're not necessarily going to look to the government exclusively for advice. We're going to basically survey our properties. And I know a lot of major companies, Fortune 100 companies, that are going out and saying voluntarily employees can come back. And that's been an experiment for them. They're asking these employees, is it working? And are you, in fact, being more exposed? And then they're looking at data to determine how they phase back their reopening going forward. So the good news is that PropTech is starting to infiltrate this dynamic. The bad news is that it's going to happen in a stutter step way for a long time because of the way the infrastructure is in place.
Joel, you're involved with Stealth Ventures. Talk to me about certain of the other ventures that you're handling down under, as they would say in Australia.
The background of what we do, it's more like an incubation. So we come up with some unique ideas. We look at what the market's doing. We look at the numbers and see exactly what people are looking for concerning real estate. One of the things that we really have seen is a big shift in the way consumers are interacting with property. And specifically now, you only have to look at what Netflix is doing. You can really see that explosion within the online, on-demand type viewing atmosphere. And so that type of thing's happening with property as well. So there's been a real shift in the way that consumers are looking for real estate. Realtor.com, Zillow, and Zoopla in the UK, SeLegere in France, they're all very unique platforms, but they're all doing things very much the same. And so what we did is we focused more about what the consumer wants to see. And the consumer's very interested in things like Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all those different type of applications. They're not really involved in that same type of consumer appreciation, I guess you could call it, with those platforms as they are with social media. And OTT like a Netflix. And so that's where we really tried to bridge the gap between that. And so we use a lot of that data of watch habits to create new shows, but then what we also do is use that to actually build out new technologies. So for instance, some of the tech that we're working on is augmented reality, where we can actually look at a property in real time. Now, you do have to use your phone at the moment to hold up to a house to see how much that house is worth, but we don't see that in 10 years' time. So in 10 years' time, it's very much going to be a different atmosphere where you will have some type of wearable tech on your eyes. And so you will have that type of ability to, look at that type of property search in a new type of environment. And then also with our AI, which is actually built into our platform at the moment to actually distinguish not only what are you looking at, but what are you interested in? So the analogy we really like to use is, Myrtle Beach, for instance, you watch on HGTV, Beachfront Bargain Hunt, for instance, and there's a property there, $200,000 on the beach. Wow, I can really get a property on the beach for $200,000. And then the very next thing the consumer does is that they Google Myrtle Beach, and then they Google the realtor, and then they Google, properties around there that are actually for sale. And so we wanted to create that closed ecosystem where we actually supply all of that type of platform, if that makes sense.
Okay, so here's a question I'd like to pose to all of you. COVID came and it's still here. What are the opportunities that you see, with after a vaccine and today? As Warren was saying, $40 billion in prop tech over the years. Now, as I brought out, $9 billion last year. Where do you see the opportunities for 2021 and go on? Warren, Brad, and Jeff?
What's interesting about real estate, and certainly COVID-19 has put a lot of pressure on the idea that the real estate or the effective management of people and things goes way beyond just the physical four walls of the building itself. So people tend to experience their real estate, as Joel was kind of pointing out, that they're experiencing real estate beyond the four walls when you're in it, when you're out of it, when you're looking at it. You may not even go to it to actually put a purchase price on things these days. I mean, think about that. You're going to buy a property without ever going, possibly, with augmented reality. So what you're doing with real estate to a large extent is extending it with technology way beyond the physical four walls. So technology that allows for that and provides that sort of connectivity outside of the four walls is truly what I think where prop tech is going. It's extending the value proposition of technology of a property in and of itself by adding a technology layer to it.
Yeah, I go one step further, and the definition of commercial space or office space is changing as we speak. And I think that was inevitable, but the pandemic accelerated it. So now a lot of people who never thought they were going to be doing what we're doing right now, which is working from home and doing a video conference, are doing it ubiquitously. And I think that when we start to do this phased in return, a lot of what we're doing is still going to be done. And so then the question is, do I really need an office 365 days a year in the middle of Manhattan, or can I share it with 4 or 5 partners? And so the whole idea of commercial space is morphing as we speak. And then there's a secondary issue, which is if my office space is in essence virtual, it may be in 5 or 6 or 10 different locations, then how do I create locations into commercial office space, right? In other words, how do I make them commercially ready so that I can continue to conduct business? So there's a lot of information behind that premise, right? Which is when I go to work, whether it's the physical workspace in Midtown Manhattan or wherever it is it ready? Is it safe? Is there 30 people in that space, or are there 3 people in that space? Was there an incident a day or two ago, or has it been cleaned? And so there's a whole host of other issues that are requiring the real estate industry to provide a lot more real-time, critical decision-making information that's going to be incorporated into the value proposition overall. And I think that is really where the opportunities lie in the near term for prop tech, at least on the commercial side.
Brad, Logical Buildings changed its venue and type of programs. What new products are you seeing out there, and what are you planning?
One of the largest barriers that existed in real estate, and it still exists today, is I can buy $1 trillion of stock and just call up and do it with a standard contract. I can't do that with a piece of real estate. I still can't do that. And the first thing we do when we go to buy something and we're finished, ready to work on the contract, is we look at all the contracts that service the building that are totally disparate, and we say, how many of these can we terminate? And for the sake of terminating them, many buyers terminate them into their own formats and their own vendors. What Jeff and I are doing is changing that. We're creating, and we've created these platforms as a service that service thousands of buildings. And the procedures that we are doing, no different than Notarizes as well, the procedures that we are doing are an envelope in which most institutional buildings are starting to feel comfortable. And so they're not saying, let's close the door to these vendors who are already there. They're saying, we adapt these practices, this software, this data gathering, the assemblage of the information for the benefit of security, or in our case, in the benefit of sustainability and energy savings. And that's making a huge difference. COVID has accelerated that tremendously, because nobody can get into the buildings really without some sort of clearance. And so people have come to these tech platforms and jumped in with both feet, because that's possible. When you talk about all of the money that's coming into this market, because people are now in our industry for the very first time, the last couple of years and the next 10 years in an explosive way, starting to understand the value of the data that's flowing into their building, from their building, and out of their building that never did before, with sensors or mechanical capacities or machine queue and other communication capacities and open APIs that we can all share. And that ability to create effectively a marketplace for what we do that ultimately creates data that makes the 5 or 10 big data companies interested desperately in coming into the business in a long-term way, is allowing that capital to take the benefit of the crunching of these margins and picking it up solely on the basis of data. And we're all integrating. We're all finding our ways to integrate. And for the first time, you can really now see at a real estate closing, our systems being continued on, and the typical buyer taking, or lender, allowing their historical patterns of providing these services to go away. And that is fascinating, that the actual documents and the people who are doing them are separate and apart, and they're one-offs, but the systems that envelop the building to make the building safer, to make the building operate better, to give it resiliency, sustainability, comfort level, more utilization as an office building in different ways, safety issues for tenants inside the building, telephony, all of the other things. They're all now embracing that system and saying to the people in the middle who have the money and are buying buildings, you don't need to do that anymore. And that is a tremendous catalyst for all of our companies.
I think a great example when you bring up data is, and what CoStar has evolved over the years. When it comes to commercial real estate, everybody knows about CoStar and they use it. How do you integrate CoStar into other companies that, like Jeff's company and Blair's and Brad's company and Joel's company, in different markets?
Great question. I mean, Andy Florence, you know, as many of you may be aware, launched CoStar in his dorm room, sophomore year at Princeton. And the rest is history. But he had a vision, and I think the vision is being realized, which is basically that, you know, commercial real estate information is incredibly valuable, and that if you have captured that information and it's current and it's objective, that it can have extraordinary value downstream. And we're starting to see a lot of the other applications for that data as he's moved into other verticals like apartments, like condos. He's moved internationally into the UK, and he's looking at Europe. Just made an acquisition in Germany that allows them to have photographs and information about properties worldwide. And so the idea is that that information has a lot more value than just for the initial transaction, as Brad touched upon, but that downstream, people are looking at comp values. As I mentioned earlier, people are saying to themselves, gee, that office that I have, what is its value today, but what is its value tomorrow? And as we look at opportunities for instance, space as a service, right? So space is also changing. We don't have as many, commercial real estate buildings that have static tenants, right? The tenants are varying time from time. WeWorks was clearly ahead of its time in many ways, both good and bad, but it showed that there are a lot of early stage companies, mid-stage companies that don't necessarily want to ink a 5 to 10 year lease. And so because of that high turnover and churn in the use of that commercial real estate, an information repository like CoStar has extraordinary value.
Technology has the ability to, it basically accents the differentiation, because real estate by its nature, even in New York, every building's a little bit different, and you can take that technology and sort of accent the differentiators. And then on the other side, you could sort of optimize the mundane, the stuff that nobody really is impressed with or cares about. You have an opportunity to optimize that in a way that creates like a marketplace. The other thing that technology does, and something that's important to us, is we create safe environments. By using the data in a smart way, we can create a more safe, trusted environment. Out of all of this gathering is really, at the end of the day, what the owners, the people who sign leases really want to know is, am I making the right decision? And here's the data to prove it's the right decision. So from it, it covers a lot of interesting value.
What we're going to do in 2021 is bring you all back and see what the real numbers are. But I think we've been a very informative explanation of PropTech, and probably, even with the pandemic, there'll be probably $10 billion of investments in 2020 when the numbers go there. I'd like to thank Warren, Brad, Joel, especially since you're staying up late down under, and Jeff, and I'll see you next week. Thanks again.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.